All right, in this lesson, we're going to be doing an entire web design mockup inside of XD. Now, if you recall from the previous lesson, we did our wireframe and we did our basic style guide, and now's the time to actually do the designing for the full mockup. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this wireframe and we're going to create one more artboard based off of this one. So if we come down here and we select the artboards or the layers button here, it will toggle out our layers. And you can see right now we only have a couple of items in here. We have our wireframe artboard and our style guide. So we're going to right click the wireframe and we're just going to say duplicate. And that basically creates an exact copy. And we're going to call this one our mockup. So just double click that title there and rename this to mockup. Now for our mockup, we actually don't want all these bright colored boxes. So what we can do is we can just highlight all of these guys and we're just going to turn off the fill, but leave the border. And the border just allows us to see those bounds while we're sort of mocking things up. And then eventually we're just going to turn off the border on all these elements as well. But we'll leave it there temporarily. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is make sure we can't accidentally move these guys around. So if we just highlight the entire lot, we can let's try that again. Highlight the entire lot and then right click. If we can try to click on one here. No, it's not going to let me do that. There we go. I'm trying to lock them. If we highlight them all, there we go. And then right click and you can say lock. And that will just make it so that they still are visible, but I'm not able to select them and move them because we're going to be drawing a bunch of assets on top and we don't want to accidentally select these things here. Okay, now you remember in the previous lesson I talked about this little blue line. And what this blue line is it's basically your viewport height. We know that the viewport on a screen is the size that's viewable by the user on whatever resolution or width and height computer monitor they're viewing your website or even mobile phone. And if your site is bigger than the viewport, you're going to have to scroll left and right or scroll up and down. So this sort of simulates where that cutoff point is. Above that line is what we call above the fold. The fold meaning where the web page is fold, and below that line is below the fold. So the fold is actually a very important term in the advertising industry online because advertisers will pay more for things that are above the fold versus below the fold. So that's kind of what that term means. Now to simulate this, you can come to an artboard, and if you click the play button right here inside of Adobe XD, you will get a preview of what that looks like inside of a browser. And I can use my left and right arrows to cycle between all of the different artboards. So if I come to this artboard here, notice I can click and drag and simulate what this is going to look like on a browser, where that cutoff is and where they'll have to scroll, assuming, right, that the viewport is set right there. Now, you can also modify that value. So let's close out of this preview. And inside of here, if I select this back here, select the wireframe, notice this viewport height variable. That number is where that blue line, that dashed line sets at. So I can just drag this around up or down, or I can just modify the value right there. Okay, so that's kind of how that works. So now you understand that viewport height. You have to realize in your mockup, when somebody lands on your page, they're probably only going to be able to see the information up here unless they scroll. So that's where you want your important information. Menus, things, calls to action, things like that should be right visible without the user having to scroll around. Okay, so let's go ahead and do some designing. Now the first thing we're going to do is build in our little menus. And you'll recall back here we have a couple of buttons. So I'm just going to grab this outline button here. I'm just going to say Command C to copy and come over here and say Command V to paste and just drag this guy up here in my menu. So I'm going to center it somewhere around here, but I'm going to change a few elements. So let's zoom in here, and I want this element to behave like that pink button. So I'll get my select tool and just select it. So I'm going to change the fill color to, again, I've got to come over here, escape. I've got to switch back over to my assets panel here using this little guy. So I want the fill color to be the same as this, and I actually want my border element here to be the same as well. So they're both going to act like that. Now, what I can do here, now that I have one, is I can create a component from both of these. So if I highlight both of these elements and right click and say make component, this sort of turns this into an object or a symbol. So a component is like a master copy, and I can hold down Option now and create a whole bunch of versions of this. I'm just going to drag these at random. And notice that when I select all of these, the upper left-hand corner is not highlighted. But if I select the original, this one, the upper left-hand corner has this diamond. That's telling me that this is the original master component. And if you edit something in the master component, all of the children will automatically propagate. So watch what happens when I come into the master. Let's go into the border and change this to 10 and hit return. Notice all of those children components get updated as well. But if I make that same change in a child, so let's come into a child component. Let's select this and change the border to 10. Only this instance is updated. So that's the difference between a master component and a child component. It's kind of very similar to the way we set up our color styles and our character styles, meaning you can have one component and then use that everywhere. And if I need to update that, all of those instances are automatically updated, which is kind of a nice little feature. If you're familiar with Illustrator, it's similar to symbols inside of Illustrator or smart objects inside of Photoshop. Components are kind of a similar type of concept. So I'm going to undo that, and let's go ahead and just delete all these little instances down here really quick. And let's now take this component and let's modify it. So what we're going to do is we're just going to drag this guy out. Whoops. We're going to drag this guy out, and I don't know, I guess the spacing here really doesn't matter all that much, but I'll just go with 16 pixels. And I'm just going to randomly sort of change these a bit. So this one, just to make it a little bit more realistic, we're going to call, maybe this is our about link. And notice how my text is changing on them all. I actually want this uppercase as well. And let's create another copy here, 16 pixels. Hold down space to pan, and we'll create one more copy of this guy. And we'll call this one, let's just rename all these now. So this one we're going to call contact. This one over here we're going to call, I don't know, blog, and then we'll call this one over here sign up. Sign dash up. Okay. Now we need to recenter these texts or maybe adjust the width of our buttons. So we can come over here, and again, this is going to adjust them all. And I'm just going to kind of eyeball this and center that back up. This one will pull back over, but we need to probably increase the size of this one. Same thing here, we'll center that first, and then we'll adjust the size because it kind of maintains that there. And that one will center, whoops. We're going to center this one. And then adjust its size as well. Close enough for now. Maybe that one needs to go here a bit bigger. Okay, now I'm going to redistribute these guys. So you can hold down the Shift key on all these, so select them all, and we're going to be using our distribution tools. And this one I want to distribute them to have equal space horizontally. So that will redistribute them. So then we're just going to kind of adjust this guy a little bit more. Now what we want to pay attention to is this line right here. So I'm going to pull over a guide. If you hover over the left side of your artboard right here, you'll see it slightly changes color. That allows you to pull a guide. So I'm going to pull a guide and drop one right there. Then I'm going to pull one and drop one right there. I want this far right button to not go outside of the bounds. So I'm just going to pull these guys over and get that guy to line up there. So that's looking pretty good. Now I can highlight them all and just redistribute that space evenly. And that's looking fine now for my buttons. So now let's go ahead and do the logo. Oh, sorry, one change we need to do. For this sign up button, we want it to be different. So what we can do here is I can select the sign up button. And again, Command 3 will jump you all the way in full screen. I'm going to right click it because I don't want this to be a component anymore. So I need to sort of break it apart, which is a command you could do in other programs. So I'm going to say ungroup component. So it's no longer part of that initial 3. And let's just change this guy up a little bit. So maybe we want to make this text right here white. And then we're going to fill this guy. Instead of a border, we're going to have a fill turned on. And maybe it's going to look like that instead. So that'll kind of be our version that's solid. Okay, so now that our menu is in place, let's go ahead and work on the logo. Now, I'm really not going to design up a full logo here. I'm just going to do a little placeholder. You, of course, will need to design your own logo. Adobe XD is not the best program to do this in. You probably want to do this in Illustrator or Photoshop or some other program that excels with working with vector tools. You're pretty limited on what you can do here. So what I'm going to do is just grab the text tool, and I'm just going to type the word logo here. And then I'm going to grab my circle tool, and I'm just going to draw a circle holding down shift to constrain that. And I'll change the border to the same color here and maybe set a border of 5 or something like that. And then what I want to do is I want to push this guy back. So I'm going to right click him and say send backward so that my logo's in front here, or my words rather. And then I'm just going to center this up inside of the middle here. And then lastly, what I'll do is I'll select, I kind of want there to be a bit of a cutout here for the logo. So I'll just grab a little shape and I'll drag that shape in here like so. And I'm going to turn off the border, and let's just fill this with a bright color so we can see this. And what I can do is if I open up my layers panel, I want my rectangle and my ellipse. So I'm holding down the command key on the keyboard and clicking that so I have both of those layers selected. And I'm going to move over here to the top right, and I'm just going to use, these are all the merge and subtract tools. So I just want to cut that out like so. Now, Adobe XD doesn't have a true clipping mask. What I really want is just a half circle here and a half circle here. I don't want a line here and I don't want a line here, but that's impossible to do in XD at this time. And then I'll just take these words here and just kind of drop them in there. So we got ourselves a little hamburger looking logo. Maybe I want to increase this font size a little bit. So maybe I'll go to 24 there and reposition that. Okay, so that's all I'm going to do just to have a little something there in our menu. So next, let's work on this area here. We're going to call this the featured area. Now, right now, this little box is locked. So I need to right click it and I need to say unlock. And there's a bit of a quirk here in XD. So what we need to do is we need to make sure that we have a folder with some assets. So I have a bunch of images here and things that I'm going to be demonstrating here. But if you try to grab an image and drop it in a box that does not have a fill, so the fill is turned off, it just places it as this gigantic image. So you need to first make sure that this box here has a fill. So I'm just going to turn that back on. Then I can drag and drop inside of there and it will mask that right to the area. Now you can double click here to reposition or rescale this thing however you want. I'm just going to kind of reposition it maybe somewhere right around there and call that good. All right, let's work on the content area down here. So the content is just going to have some text here. I'm just kind of call this the welcome to the mockup. And then below that, we probably have a paragraph of text, something like this. So rather than type something out, I'm just going to go over here to our design style guide, copy some text, and just paste that back in over here. Okay, now we can use those presets. So I can switch back over here to my design assets. I can click on the heading and I can just click on my heading with one click and we're done. Click on this and click on the paragraph and we're done. So now those are matching up. And then we can, of course, align these, I don't know, however we want inside of here. I'll just leave it there for now. Let's go ahead and drop in a button. So I'm going to come over to my component and drag and drop a button as well. So let's go ahead and place this button over here somewhere. And we'll just, this is going to be maybe a call to action. So I'll just say call to action. And then let's reposition this guy as well. So we'll come into this frame and we'll pull that out. And then, whoops, looks like I have an extra space or a return in there. Let's delete that return. Good enough. Now this, whoops, keep clicking on the wrong thing. So we'll just move this over a little bit and let's actually change the fill. So we're gonna come in here to the fill and it is, so we actually wanna modify this quite a bit. So we're gonna right click it and let's reset. We don't want it to be a master, we don't want it to be a component. So I'm gonna say ungroup component and we're gonna make this guy have a fill. And the fill color is going to be our sort of teal. And the text color is going to be probably just white. So we'll just come over here and make that white. And the border, we're just going to turn off. So this is going to be another component. So now let's select all of this, right click and say make a component. So now we have two components, right? We have one that's a button that's that style and another one that's a button that's that style. And we can drag and drop those and use them wherever we want. Okay, that's good enough for that little area. Let's maybe drop in an image or something over here. So I'll just get my rectangle tool here and I'm just gonna draw out a rectangle like so. And this rectangle I'm going to fill, no border, but I'm gonna fill it with that same color. So we'll get our, whoops, fill like so. And then I'm gonna get my rotation tool and just actually, let's copy this first. So I'll create one more of these. And this guy, I'm gonna drag and drop in my, I just option clicked, by the way. I option clicked and dragged to create a copy. And I'll drag this image and drop it in right here. I'll double click. I'll kind of scale this guy maybe way up and reposition him somewhere in there. And then this backdrop, I'm gonna rotate slightly and then just use my arrow keys to kind of nudge him around. So just to create something a little bit more interesting there. And that looks fine for me. So I can now highlight both of those layers, right click and create a group from them. And then I can move them around as a unit. So then I can kind of go ahead and reposition this guy and stick him right there. So anyway, you can play around. That's just a little sample of how to use groups and a few things like that. Next down here, we're going to be creating what's known as a repeating grid. So what we need to know is I know I want 4 thumbnails. I want 1, 2, 3, 4. And those 4 thumbnails are going to showcase some of this artwork. So we need to know the width of this element. So if we select this, it looks like the width is 1088. But I know I want to have a 16 pixel to maintain this same 16 pixel gutter in between those. So there's going to be a 1 here, 1 here, and 1 here. So there's 3 of those. So if I say 16 times 3, that's 48 pixels. So if we take our 1088, so we'll say 1088 minus 48, let's put that in parentheses. We're trying to calculate how big each box needs to be, divided by 4. That's 260 pixels. Okay, so now I can grab my box tool, and I'm just going to create a placeholder box here that is 260 pixels wide. And I guess we could make them square. We could maybe make them tall like this. It really doesn't matter. I'll just make them tall. So we'll say 260. And let's go ahead and give this guy a fill of red and turn off the border. Now watch what happens when I select this element here. I can turn on this thing called repeating grid. So I'm going to toggle this as a repeating grid element. And I can just simply pull this to the right. And you can see it perfectly matches up. And I can pull this down. I can pull it up to create repeating grids like so. Now what's kind of nice when you have a repeating grid, you can come over to a bunch of images. So here I've got just a bunch of random artworks. I'm just going to select 4 of these guys. And I can just drag and drop, and it will automatically populate through all of those elements in the repeating grid. Okay, now let's just clean this up a little bit. So maybe I'm going to take this entire group here and just move it up to right there. And then we'll patch that right there. And then maybe let's just unlock this really quick. Move this up here to the bottom, and then we'll just take our footer here. Let's unlock this as well. Whoops. If I can select it, there we go. And we'll just bring him back up to give us that little same distance there. Okay, so that's pretty much it for the wireframe. Now what we can do is we can come over to our layers, and let's come into our Mockup artboard. And here's all the different layers. Now all these rectangles here are all the background rectangles, except that one. That one we want to leave. So we'll move this rectangle up a bit. all of these are those background rectangles. So I'm just going to hide them all. So we can just hide all of these guys because we don't want those borders anymore. And let's take this rectangle and turn the border off. And that's looking pretty fine there. Whoops, we need to make one more change on our bottom rectangle. Okay, I don't know which one the bottom one is. I've got to turn them all off one by one to find it. So we can rename this one footer. And we do want to leave this one on because we want to give it a solid fill. So let's go ahead and unlock this guy, and we'll fill this guy with the color over here in our style guide of gray. And maybe we probably want our footer to extend all the way. So I'm going to grab this footer and I'm going to drop it all the way from left to right, like so. Okay, we can go ahead and hide these guides as well. The command semicolon will hide and show the guides, so we can just turn those off. And then now let's go ahead and click our preview button. So we'll click the preview. There's our style guide. There's our wireframe. And then here's now our actual mockup. So let's go full screen here on this. And you can kind of see. So if I'm in my browser, this is what it's going to look like. I can scroll up and scroll down. And we'll consider that done. Now, I didn't do a lot of design in this on purpose because I really want you to kind of spend some time and come up with some unique layouts, some unique colors, and do things just how you want. Again, remember, with that 4-column grid, feel free to mix and match those columns however you want, as long as you stay in those 4 columns. So, for example, if you want your middle section, let's actually get out of here and come back to our Adobe XD. If you want a section that is only 1 over here, that's fine. If you want 3, that's fine. If you want 4 full width or stretchy, right? Mix and match those however you want. If you want these 2 sections combined, just create one giant header instead of having a header and and a featured element. So feel free to mix and match, but always stick with that 4 overall. But you're more than welcome to merge 3, merge 2. If you want half and half, 2 equal columns, you can merge 2 and merge 2. So just kind of stick with that rule and that will make the coding a lot easier. Okay, so we're going to look at a couple of variations here on our simple comp here. Now I'm not going to design these out from scratch. I've already done them all. I'm just going to show you the variations, but I want you to go ahead and design your own as well so you can kind of see a couple of variations on the same idea. So remember, we have the basic 4-column layout that we're working with here, and I'm just going to show you a couple of these comps. So I've just simply come over to my artboards here, and I've selected my artboard, which is for my wireframe. And if you right click that, you can just say duplicate. And that'll just create an exact copy over here to the right side. And then you can go ahead and modify it as you need. So in this second copy here, the only change really I've made is I've added a background gradient. So you can see here, I've added a BG over here in the right. And on that background, I've just given it a fill. So I've come over here and I've turned on a fill, and I've just kind of played around with a little bit of gradient colors that are in my color scheme, and just in a nice big radial gradient starting at the top left down to the bottom right. Okay, the other change I've made, as you can see here, this element was taking up 3 columns. This element here was taking up 1 column. And then I've changed that slightly in this variation where it's 2 and 2. And then I've played around here with the thumbnails a little bit at the bottom. Instead of 4 across, I've done 4 across and 2 rows. So just a slight variation on the same concept, but mainly with a different color background to illustrate that you can place gradients on your background as well. Now over here in this third variation, similar concept, except instead of a background, I have used a repeating pattern. So I'm going to go ahead and select on this background here. And you can see that I do have a repeating pattern, but it's set up in what is known as a repeating grid. So you can see, just like we did with the thumbnails, this pattern is a repeating grid. So I'm going to illustrate how you can do this step in case you want to do a repeating grid on your own. So I'm just going to create a blank box down here in this area here, just kind of a big artboard to kind of illustrate this. And what I'm going to do is find a pattern that is repeating. Now, there's a lot of places online you can look for repeating patterns if you don't want to create your own. I'm just going to show you 1 or 2 resources quickly. Resources, one of them is the website that is known as DIN Pattern, DINPATTRN. And they're just a website that provides a bunch of random patterns here that you can use for background images in various designs. The other one over here is called Subtle Patterns. And that's, you can see it's SUBTLE subtle. And they have also various patterns that you can download and use. And all of these patterns are seamless, meaning they will tile one next to the other without seeing any visible seams. So let's come down here and let's just pick one of these patterns at random. Let's kind of go with this one. So you can click on the preview button here and it'll show you what this pattern would look like applied. And then you just go ahead and click the download button to download this pattern. Now, this is going to download a couple of different files here. It's going to download a small and a 2x, a high resolution and a low resolution, if you will, file. So once you have your photos, let's jump back to XD and show you how you can import those. Okay, inside of XD here, let's go ahead and just get our box tool. And I'm just going to create a simple box right here in the middle. And I'm going to fill this with that image. So let's go ahead and just file, and we're going to import. We're going to choose that pattern that we just downloaded. So mine is going to be here in my downloads folder. Go ahead and open up the file. And there is my wallpaper, hotel wallpaper, and just go ahead and click import. And you can see it just drops in that image here as a regular old image. Now, what we can do once we have this image is we can create a repeating grid. Actually, I guess we don't even need this box. It'll just import the image as is. So once you have your image, come over here to the top right and click the repeating grid button. And then you can go ahead and pull out this option and pull out the bottom option. And you can see it's just tiling that pattern left and right in this repeating grid. So what we want to do really is we want to take this and tag it up there to the top left so it's aligned or constrained at the top left, and then drag this down at the bottom right. So we're just basically making this image the same size as our artboard. When you have a repeating pattern, remember you can grab the spacing and increase the spacing on the row and column between these patterns. Now essentially what we want to do is set that to 0. So I can take this down and I'm watching this number. It's kind of hard to see, but watch this number that appears right here. I'm watching that until it hits 0. So I'm just going to drag, 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 drag until it goes all the way to 0, and you don't even 1 pixel off will mess this up. So you need to make sure it's right exactly on 0, right there. Okay, and then you let go. And we do the same thing over here for the column spacing. I'm watching that top value until it hits 0 and right there, and then let go. And now I've created this repeating pattern. Now I can just fix this and pull that back over to the right, pull that back down to the bottom, and there we go. So you can use this repeating pattern now inside of your website. Now, the good thing about repeating patterns is when I use them on the web, it's the same concept. I only load the small single tile, the small image, and then I use CSS to automatically repeat that left and right. So it downloads much quicker because we don't have to download some giant background image. So that is how you can use repeating patterns if you want to do that for the background on maybe one of your comps. So let's just look at a couple of these other comps here. So that was this one, just illustrating how to use a repeating pattern there on the background. This second one here is a similar concept, except instead we're using a full image as the background. So you can see here there's this big large image in the background, and then I've sort of kept the same 2 columns here, but the only difference in this one is that this middle column spans 4, and I've decided to make it semi-transparent. You can see the tree kind of bleeds through there. And then we have the 4 columns down here. But just to illustrate, you can also use images as the background of your website as well. So you can use solid colors, you can use gradients, you can use repeating patterns, or you can use any image as well. Okay, and then this last comp over here is the similar concept. I have an image as the background, except now I've sort of sandboxed, if you will, this entire content column with this dark sort of fill that's semi-transparent. So I've just filled it with black, and I've set the opacity here to 50%. So it kind of helps separate the content from the background a little bit, and all that we can accomplish as well. So that's just a few samples of some variations that you can see. Now all of these variations are sticking to our same 4-column basic layout. And feel free to use your own variations, come up with something completely new. I just wanted to show you a few takes on how you can really customize your layout pretty easily. Then the last comp here we'll look at is we did a little bit of design for our mobile view. So we're going to have a basic responsiveness in our website. So this is what it's going to look like on a mobile phone. You can see the wireframe is very similar to my desktop, except everything is just going to stack in 1 column on top. And then just a quick sample of what that may look like on a mobile phone like so. So on the mobile mockup, you can see we have our logo here over to the left. We have a hamburger menu that will fly out our main navigation. And then all the other columns sort of just stack on top of one another, however we want to lay those out up and down. And that's what our mobile will look like. So that is pretty much it for the Adobe XD design mockup. And now what we're going to do in future video tutorial is we're going to take all of these assets and learn how we can export them out of Adobe XD so we can get our various images and backgrounds and colors and all those things ready to actually build the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to make our fully functioning website. So we will see you in the next one.